Michael, thank you so much for joining us today on Make It Happen Mindset podcast. As you know, I'm massively interested in the whole category and area of sleep, which is why I've asked one of the foremost experts probably in the world to come on the podcast today to really share, your experience, your understanding, what you've learned from all your years of study, to help people get a better night's sleep. Because we do know, a bit like, as I said to you in the warm up, a bit like creatine, this is something that everybody's talking about, but I don't think there's a lot of science that's being shared at the moment. So I wanted to talk to somebody that really is a scientist. He's been there, done it, got the PhD, got the hat in your case as well, and can hopefully, dispel any myths, tell us what's happening in terms of sleep technology, what you've learned over the last 25, 26 years now. I think you began working in the sleep lab, in 98?
Yeah, that is correct.
And then got your PhD and then gone on to do more research, to become a practitioner and so on and so forth, and look at technology, etc. So really no better person. One thing I'd just like to kind of get out the way is, and I said to you earlier, there's this mother's wives tale about having a hot cup of milk before you go to bed. Is there any science in that?
Well, I'm going to say no. I mean, I don't really look at any sort of trials like that, but let me just put it this way. I mean, I've been treating insomnia for over 20 years. And when you're seeing someone for the first time, you're asking all these different questions and you're asking, what have you tried before? The amount of people with insomnia that say, I've tried milk and honey or something like that, and it hasn't worked. And yeah, to me, it doesn't make sense. I think the only time you would have pretty much a cup of milk where it might help you sort of go to sleep is if you're quite distracted and you're feeling hungry, you need to line your tummy. And it's really the distraction that's probably preventing you from going back to sleep. So it's maybe in that case, you can sort of line your stomach with a cup of milk and then, not be distracted, hopefully drift off.
Right. Okay. Well, there you get it. Grandmothers everywhere are wrong. But getting on to your early years in research, if you could just take us back to what that involved and how you got into this area, what it was that drew you to it, and kind of what you've learned over the last 25 years.
Yeah, thanks. So back in the 1990s, I went to Flinders University to study psychology, and we had this lecturer called Professor Leon Lack, who was studying sleep, and I just absolutely loved his classes and was really drawn to it. So sort of to cut a long story short, I just stayed at uni. I just did all of the different degrees. I did my PhD under Leon. So I looked at basically sleep, circadian rhythms, insomnia, and thermoregulation for my PhD, which I finished up in 2005. And around the same time, I was also doing my master's in clinical psych, so training to become a clinical psychologist, again, training in Leon's clinic. And specifically, that was for people that had insomnia or circadian rhythm disorders. So I was marrying really the science as well as, implementing this in practice during the week. Then when I got my degrees, I managed to sort of just roll straight into an academic position that was a clinical position. So I got to really explore whatever I wanted when it came to sleep and doing sleep research and continuing my clinical practice, opening up a clinic and even running like clinical trials through that. So it's interesting to hear you sort of, in the warm-up talk about so many people that are sleep experts, they're talking about sleep, and there's not a day that goes past that I open up my feed and I get fucking frustrated at what I'm listening to. And I'm like saying, that is not true. But, there are some credible people out there. People do know about, say, for example, Matt Walker. Matt Walker's a sleep scientist. So, yeah, he is out there and probably one of our best people translating the sleep science. But then again, I'm going to name names. You got someone like Andrew Huberman. And if you actually look at his research, it's with rodents and the eyeballs of rodents. He is not a sleep scientist. And it's amazing how many people sort of hear Stanford or hear a professor and then just go, yep, I'll just swallow whatever this guy's going to give me. So I think in relation to what you're saying, if people want to sort of like learn about sleep science, great. There are some of us that are sleep scientists, but also about how you sleep better. To take another example, and this is not to diss Matt Walker, but he's not trained health professional, whereas, I am. So I think it's really important that people do understand the messages, who they are coming from. I mean, the message is really important. It's got to be credible. In fact, I say to people, don't sort of end with what I say. Go on with yourself and also try to look for this research yourself. People can learn how to do it. So, I'll sort of answer it sort of really that way.
That's great. I mean, it's a really interesting point. I mean, obviously the fitness industry, and I'm going to include you in that, because I think, you can't achieve fitness without having good quality sleep, which is probably, just diluting down like 30 years of your research. But, I think that the tendency is, like you said, if somebody sees somebody in a white coat or with a six-pack or with a big Instagram following or from a particular university and assumes that they're experts, and they're often not. And I think, although obviously we all want everybody to become more fit and eat better and so on, so I think that's a positive thing that everybody can contribute to. I think, like you said, it's really important where you get that information from and how authentic and what's their gain. So, some of the people that you've mentioned, they have financial interests in companies that they're kind of using their science to promote, and it's sometimes, like you said, it's kind of pseudoscience. So on that note, is there anything you want to get off your chest that you're involved in that you're involved in that's going to have a bit of a financial benefit, and that's why we've got you on the podcast? I think the answer is probably no.
Well, I think there can be a perceived benefit, because I mean, I left the university sector in 2021. And I moved over to what some people would say would be the dark side. So I do now consult for a company called Sleep Cycle, which is a sleep tracker. I do get paid, but if they do better, I don't necessarily get more money or anything like that. And I would have to say that what I really do like about the company is the culture behind it. I don't know if necessarily if it's a Swedish culture or if it's just the fact it's this particular company, but they have been incredibly respectful when I say, no, that's the line. I'm not going past that. I'm not going to say that. I don't think we should say that. It's like this is where I can be confident that this is what's happening in terms of the truth about sleep. But I don't want to be saying this bullshit over here, or I don't want to, put my name next to that. So take me out. And they've been wonderful to be able to respect that. And I think I've had some other experiences with other companies where they have been really almost like encouraging is a softer word, but probably trying to almost like enforce that I sort of quote or say a certain thing about, a particular thing having to do with their product. And it's just like, no, that is absolutely cherry picking. You are choosing that good result there, and you're not neglecting the whole pattern of results and stuff. So yes, that's where I'm coming from. But I think it's important to declare your conflicts and
So on that note, obviously there are a lot of sleep monitoring devices. My personal view, and again, it'd be great to get the expert's point of view, is if it tells you haven't slept, let's say a whoop or something, it's just telling you what you probably already knew. If you went to bed, sat there like I often do, trying to go to sleep, but with 1,000 things going right around your head, and then you had 3 hours sleep instead of the goal of 8 or 9, it's just telling me what I already know. It's not giving me a solution to fixing that problem. So do you think that reinforcement of telling me that I haven't slept is a positive or a negative, if at all? And what can one do, whether it's stuff going through your head or whatever your issue may be, from all your, again, condensing down 25 years of research and experience, what can an individual do in general terms? I know it's going to vary from one individual to another, just to set themselves up for the chance of a better night's sleep.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think the simple answer for me is that we use measurement tools to really sort of see if you enact some sort of change in your behavior, do you see that reflected in your sleep? And so the question is, what tool do you use? Now, clinically for years, we use what's called a sleep diary. It's basically a log that you do with pen and paper, and you indicate when you go to bed, when you slept, and so forth. And we do that. We make sure people complete that. So we've got a picture, essentially, of what their sleep looks like. It's not just their night of sleep and so forth. It's really a sleep pattern across a week. And then we suggest to them, and it can take different forms. I mean, like, there'll be other sleep therapists, and I started out this way of sort of giving them 3 or 4 different techniques in the first session and see how you go. But I started to get more like, here's one technique. I think this one's going to be the most potent one. Do this one. Okay. And then after we've done that one, we'll do another one. And we're basically doing a sleep diary the whole time. So that way they can sort of see what is the best bang for the buck, almost like what's the return on investment of your time. Yeah. So when it comes to like the sleep trackers and so forth, I mean, you want them to be reasonably accurate. And it's just a different perception, really, because if I look back, probably even on my early research years, we were doing work with people estimating, like with a sleep diary, what was your sleep like last night, and giving us their sort of answers. And we're comparing that to EEG polysomnography. And a lot of the talk about sleep trackers is saying they're not accurate and so forth compared to polysomnography, but people's perception isn't accurate either. But it's important. I think when we're looking at, say, trials that people have done for insomnia, for example, and there's been so many trials over the decades, a lot of the time, the measurement tool is people's perception. It's the sleep diary. And if you're seeing that change in perception in the sleep diary and it's matching improvements in their perception of their mood, or, like it's gone on to a whole range of different, even like objective measures. I think there was one study that found MRI changes even after treatment for insomnia. Then it's suggesting people's perceptions are important. If they believe that their sleep has changed and improved and they're seeing it mirrored in other aspects of their life, then it's likely that that tool has been working, but also the behavior change has been working as well.
So what kind of tools do you recommend? Is it kind of like breath work? Is it use of supplements, pharmaceuticals, combination? What is the, for somebody listening now who may be struggling getting their 8 hours, I'll keep saying 8 hours, that's probably going to tell me that's not actually the best optimum amount, but we'll stick to that for the ease of like the 5 a day thing that we have with fruit. What can somebody, without having the ability to come and see somebody like yourself, what are the practical things that you can do to set yourself up for, I guess, sleep success?
Great question. And unfortunately, it's not easy, because I think I found this early in my career where journalists would sort of ask me about my study and all that sort of stuff. And then they come up with that final question. And so what are the top three sleep tips?
Yeah.
And to me, it's just like, and I'm getting it far more now, people are always, what are the sleep tips? And it's just like, hang on, let's back up a bit. You got to find out what is the problem first, because there are so many different reasons why sleep can go wrong. It's really the canary in the mine. So, on the one hand, people can not necessarily get their 8 hours of sleep because they're waking up a fair bit during the night. That might be caused by a range of things that, like what you're mentioning to me, it's too hot, or it might be the fact that they sort of have some sort of like sleep disorder breathing that's waking them up, and then they're struggling to get back to sleep. It could be that their circadian rhythm is mistimed, so that they're falling asleep late and then they have to get up for work and so forth. So they're not getting it, or they've got insomnia, or they've basically just got what some people would call bad sleep hygiene, where they're sort of not necessarily having their environment or their behaviors that are very good. Like, one guy I talked to in the past couple of weeks, time got away from him and suddenly it was midnight and he had to get up at 4:30 a.m. Stuff like that is obviously not going to get you complement hours. That's not insomnia. That's not a circadian rhythm issue. It's not sleep apnea. It's just being aware of like putting sleep first. So I can almost like give the best, or a suggestion of what could be a good matching treatment for the particular problems. I think really the first step is to sort of go, okay, what is the cause? Why am I feeling this way? Why is it taking a long time to fall asleep? And really sort of get analytical about it, which is what pretty much the process I go through with clients when they come to see me.
Okay, so if, let's say, we take a client who's busy, stressed person, there's a lot of kind of CEOs out there who I guess the other thing, just digress a bit, there's this whole thing of going to bed, like getting 4 hours sleep and being super busy, and this is the way that we have to be. Do you think ultimately that saving up an issue for down the line by not having enough sleep, is that a sustainable and good thing to be doing for your general health and well-being, or are you just saving up a problem for the future? And then a second question would be, depending on your age, is sleep less important? Because again, I often talk to my parents, my wife's parents, and they seem to sleep a lot less, but doesn't seem to affect them in the same way that it would do my children, who they're out like a light and they could potentially sleep for 14 hours straight given the opportunity.
Yeah, cool. So to summarize, the two questions are really about like pushing the limits on a continual basis and not getting enough sleep. And the other one is like, does that change in terms of like the need and age? But on the first one, the answer is that if we look at data, especially over in the Asian cultures, like what you've described is very similar to what they sort of have as a mentality, like sleepers for the week. And, you've got to, or conversely, you just got to pack in as much into your day as possible. And they see the benefits from that. They see how much productivity they get. But when you look at studies in general, I guess, especially say the studies done in South Korea and Japan, where you're getting average total sleep times somewhere around sort of like 4 to 5 hours of sleep, if not 5 to 6 hours of sleep. And that's the average on large samples as well. And then you look at how that correlates with some really meaningful outcomes. And I'm sort of talking about suicidal ideation and even suicidal completion. And you can see that even when they do the fancy statistics and they really sort of rule out, prior history, family histories and so forth of suicidal ideation, when they rule out depression, which is a big contributing factor to suicidal ideation, there's a unique contribution from that chronic short sleep towards something like suicidal ideation. As an example, I think that was one of the first things that sort of captured my eye. And then clearly what's happening now with a lot of the research is that they're sort of like looking at, does short sleep shorten your life? They're looking at metabolic sort of indicators that I'm not really so over and understanding, I shouldn't say understanding, but not necessarily looking at that literature. So really, I would say that Asia is almost like the canary in the mine for us in the Western world. If we were to push the limits on a constant basis, you don't want to do that. So that sort of answers that question. And in terms of, like young people get more sleep than we do, and our, parents get less than us. I think what I would like to impart simply to people is that sleep takes care of itself as long as you allow it the time to. And that sort of relates to the previous question, which is that they're not giving themselves the time. It's almost like as we age, there's also this increased tendency to have a nap. And then there might be sort of people that hear mixed messages that you shouldn't nap. But there's interesting data coming out saying that if you nap compared to not napping, because you're not getting enough sleep at night, then there is actual benefits there. So it's almost like listen to your sleepiness. If you're feeling like, you have to go to bed early, or you have to sleep in a little bit longer, or have a nap, listen and go for it. Really, I think that's my advice at the moment.
Okay. I mean, so in terms of like setting yourself up, as I said earlier, are there things like, for example, turning off your phone, not watching TV, blah, blah, blah. Are these things, is there like a general like sleep hygiene, I think is the word you used earlier, that anybody can do that's going to have at least some positive impact on that sleep? Is it for now? Look at my dog, they always have a little turn around 3 times before they lie down and then they're out. So I don't know if that's like an animal thing, just to detox before they go to sleep. Is there like the equivalent for us humans?
Yeah, there probably is. And there's so much to that, really. I would say that I can talk about almost like sleep disruptors. Like, say, for example, something that's not talked about is the effect of alcohol on sleep is straight away, like that night. Like there was a lovely study done by a very wonderful sleep researcher called Mary Kaskinen. And she's been looking at this area. And even if you sort of get to that sort of like legal limit of drinking, that night it's affecting REM sleep. And then, she did a study where it was like on consecutive nights, like 3 in a row, to see what that impact was. And it is starting to mess with your sleep architecture there. And, when you look at that at a chronic level, it can be really bad. And we've done a study where we basically reviewed or evaluated a program that helped people during COVID to actually reduce their drinking. And within a month, their insomnia symptoms went down to the equivalent as if they did the gold standard insomnia treatment. So, that really has shown to me that alcohol, it really does disrupt sleep. So that's one thing to try to avoid, because people aren't talking about that. People are talking about technology use, and maybe we'll talk about that separately, because that's a big topic and that's something that I've done a lot of research on. The other one that is quite impactful, believe it or not, is if you are sleeping with another individual or pet, because when they move, there's I think one study showed a lovely sort of like almost like 30% chance that you will move and possibly therefore wake a bit, compared to not, although people prefer to actually sleep next to a partner or a pet because they like the security and the warmth. But in terms of what you can do, what is quite interesting, and I did mention this, I think, when we were at that conference together about 18 months ago, was that if you look at the data for infants, if you look at the data for, say, teenagers, as 2 examples, when they actually set a bedtime, when you have like a parent giving a baby a consistent bedtime across the week, they get much better sleep. When you've got a parent that instigates a bedtime for a teenager, they get better sleep, less fatigue, less suicidal ideation, less depression. And then we become older teenagers, we become autonomous, we want to do our own thing, which is absolutely fine and cool. But at a point, it needs to come back. And I would have to say that if you also look at the sleep techniques that we do for insomnia, sometimes a common factor in there is that we are experimenting with trying to bring in a lot of structure and a lot of consistency. So I would say that probably just making sure that you are aware of the time and trying to keep a consistent bedtime. It doesn't have to be perfect at all. It could be like a half an hour. I think I've said in the past, like a bedtime window. And it doesn't mean you have to be in another room and then wait to go to bed. I believe do some of these strategies where you can be in your bedroom, you can be on your bed, and you can be doing things, but it's just a reminder that sleep is coming up, and then just to start to really de-stimulate.
Yeah, I guess the a part of that, I guess, is that fresh. Like my wife is absolutely obsessed with having the windows open. Doesn't matter if it's rain or shine. She says, without fresh air, I can't sleep. Is there anything to that? Is having fresh air a benefit to encouraging good sleep, or can I go back with scientific support now and tell her she can shut the window in the winter?
I'm happy to give you the science, whether it improves or doesn't improve your relationship with your wife. But I think when I looked at, say, for example, these air purifiers, which is a similar sort of example in some sort of ways, there wasn't good evidence for that. But as soon as you open up the window, it's not just about the fresh air, it's about the temperature, and it's also about the noise as well. Now, the noise is obviously a factor that can disrupt sleep, but the ability to be able to have cool air coming in could be helpful, and probably especially for, dare I say, the middle-aged females. I know I'm making an assumption there about your wife's age, but certainly, in terms of the thermoregulation stuff that I learned during my PhD, I mean, what happens is we're essentially having a core body temperature decrease during the night. But in order to do that, it's not necessarily a reduction in our heat production or a decrease in our heat metabolism. It's really driven by how we lose heat from our body, which is through our extremities, hands, feet, nose, ears, lips, and head. And the way it does that best is really to be able to have a better thermal gradient. So we need to have cool air. It needs to transfer basically from the hot body to cool air. So maybe that's where your wife is getting some benefit, for example. It doesn't necessarily have to be during the night, but definitely at the first part of the night, in the evening, like after the sun sets, say, for example, here in Australia at the moment, the sunset is 6 p.m, opening up the window And then I guess when I go to bed, which will be sort of, or I should say, I'm going to go to bed before 10, but at 10, that's when my big TV turns off in the bedroom. Hint, forecasting here that I don't think screens are that bad. But at 10 o'clock, that TV will turn off. I could shut the window and the air is cool. And that'll keep cool for a decent amount of time and allow the heat to sort of transfer from my body. So that could be a reason as well.
So interesting point that you were saying about that thermal regulation. Is that why people get like night sweats? Is that the body trying to compensate for being too hot, as in they need to take some covers off? Or is that symptomatic of something else?
It can. Yeah, it can be for certain. And I think, night sweats, along with probably what happens, and there's renewed focus on this, which is really good, but also looking at menopause symptoms, like hot flushes. So say, for example, with our core body temperature, it has a circadian rhythm, and our body is hotter sort of around early evening, sort of 7 p.m. And when you look at even when women have hot flashes, it's around that sort of time as well, when their core body temperature is hot. So I guess one working theory at the moment is that if your environment is also warm and the heat can't escape from your body through the usual sort of processes, is it a case that these hot flushes happen because the blood vessels go, fuck it, I've got to just release this heat. They all basically open up more than they usually would. And then it's this release of heat as much as possible because it can't actually do it because it's not cold enough. So there's that component. But during the night, for sure, if we are too warm, the body reacts to cool down by actually sweating in the hope that there'll be air that goes across it to be able to cool the body down, just like with exercise. Yeah. So, certainly temperature is an issue, but it's almost like plan ahead for it. Like try to keep the bedroom, the air, and I'm talking about the air in the bedroom, but there's also that issue about the air under the covers as well. You've got to be aware of that.
So on that, is it, obviously you live in generally a hot climate. Unfortunately here we're all melting because none of us have AC. Does having artificial temperature control have any positive or negative effect then on sleep patterns? So if, for example, you're staying in a hotel room, you probably can't open the window for legal reasons, and you've got the AC on all night. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or is it kind of an irrelevance?
Yeah, I would have to say that you got, again, two components. One is the noise, the hum, and sometimes it'll click on and off and so forth. So it's almost like that change in that sound could probably, disturb sleep or wake people up or prevent them from falling asleep. But in contrast, really being too hot or even being too cold, certainly that could be much more disruptive. So, on balance, you'd probably go for, okay, let's just try to put the AC on, keep it cool as much as you can. And definitely that's what, I just came back from Europe in June and went to a few different places, and definitely we made sure that they had air conditioning. That's what we used to. And we made sure that we put that air conditioning on ahead of time and made sure it was cool. So yeah, definitely I would say go for air conditioning if you can. Okay. But I'm a little bit biased.
And in terms of what you see, what do you think has sparked this massive? I mean, obviously you've been looking at this category and this the science of sleep for a long time. What do you think has been, sparked this kind of more recent interest, say in the last few years, into sleep? Do you think it's being driven by medical stuff, or do you think it's the link to fitness and health that has really got people talking about it more?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I mean, if I've been in this business since 1998, and really what I saw was probably circa 2010. You actually had the positive psychology movement sort of coming through, and I come from a psychology background, and you started to sort of see that blend into a well-being type of approach that really started to come through, especially in high schools. That's where, that started to occur. And then people were like, well, how do we define well-being? What is it? And inevitably they're going, well, sleep's a component of that. I would say along and around that time, in the sort of 2010s, I would say Arianna Huffington probably gave a lot of voice to sleep and how important it was. And then Matt Walker released his book in 2017. He had a subsequent whole host of different YouTube videos on it. Bill Gates said, this is one of my favorite books for Christmas and so forth. And then you had COVID. And during COVID, that's when people were essentially doing a lot of unhealthy things. They'd noticed that they're probably, we've looked at the data, drinking rates went up. People that weren't going outside as much, they weren't exercising as much, they're probably having poor food choices. All of those things also impact sleep. And so I think people cared a bit more about their health around that time. People had to also pivot in terms of their job. Some had a rise in sort of probably digital health coaches of different sorts. And inevitably, just like the well-being movement, what is this important thing about health that we need to integrate and talk about? What is the content that we have to have in our content calendars? Sleep is one of those. And so therefore it started to go quite viral.
And you think do you think it's now kind of got to a point where it's got its own momentum and that this will continue? There'll be more research, more interest in this area, and more broader kind of investigations as to how sleep is affecting other parts of our lives? Or do you think that it's kind of going to stay more focused?
Well, I think we've been in the multiverse for a while, pretty much. There is sleep research that's been going on for as long as I've been in the business and way before.
Yeah.
And so it's been plugging away and it's doing some great stuff. I mean, like I've gone through periods of time saying sleep's important. Then I'm like, well, put sleep next to other things. And these other things are also important. But then you see other studies come out and you're going, holy crap, relative to these other things, sleep is actually really important and so forth. So I love the fact that, there's so much growth that's happening at these sleep conferences. And yes, there are some people that fall asleep at these sleep conferences, but for the most part, people are talking and learning. But it's really pleasing to see a lot of young generations coming through and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of what we are learning as a sleep science community, the translation of that to the public, that's where the problem lies. And I think the problem is that we don't have enough Matt Walkers to be out there to sort of spruik and say, this is actually a study I did and this is what we found, and people to follow them. We've got people following popular people or people that they like and people in finger quotes that they trust who don't know that research, that are basically trying to show that they're an authority. You've done something different. You're like, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about it with someone that actually does sleep science. You don't necessarily have that. So the biggest example of that is the fact that back in 2014, we published the world's first study testing whether the blue light from screens makes it difficult to fall asleep. We found that it took 3 minutes longer. And we were like, okay, holy shit, that doesn't matter. And, sort of come around about sort of 2017, that's when I was getting on social media, especially LinkedIn, a fair bit. And you were getting smatterings of people mentioning that the blue light from screens would affect sleep. And I'd get on there say, actually, no, here's a study that we just did. No, it's not true. But I got to tell you, it's a tsunami now. It's got a life of its own. It became a myth. The science was showing, even after our study, there was like 10 other studies that confirmed what we found. Yet you look on the internet, you ask ChatGPT, and it will tell you, basically, it's the blue light that's from the screens that can suppress melatonin.
Do you think that's because of commercial interests? There's like a big commercial interest in creating other devices, or creating a session on a TED talk or whatever about this, that is then propagating this kind of myth, as you would call it, rather than pseudoscience being used to achieve a commercial goal, rather than looking at true science for the benefit of mankind, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, I wouldn't say it was caused by a commercial interest that was about a device like blue blocking glasses. I think that's been a reaction to this. People have seen it as a reactionary opportunity. I think it really goes along the lines of what I said before, which is that, again, Matt Walker, he's a sleep researcher, but his speciality was in REM sleep and emotional memory. But he had a book and he had to cover so many different topics. So what are you going to do? You can't go deep. You got to sort of choose the study. So he chose this one particular study. This one particular study he chose was from Harvard, makes sense. But the Harvard study mentioned that it took significantly longer, like statistically, but it only took like 9 minutes longer. And they don't really mention that. And so when sort of Matt mentioned it in his book that it took longer to fall asleep, and then, he's doing these YouTube videos, and then COVID happens, you've got all these health coaches finding content, they're then propagating that idea. So I think in terms of the commercial interest, it's not necessarily very direct as a device or anything like that. It's more so people are trying to sort of show themselves as an authority by turning to someone that said something, whether it was Harvard initially, then Matt, and then, someone else. I think that's really what's caused that.
So I guess the moral of the story is, check your science and your research before you start spouting it off. Which again, happens. I mean, that's a massive issue, across the whole fitness and health and well-being industry, I guess. So you've talked about obviously your experience and all the people you've seen over the years. Is there anything that you identified that helps people overcome habitual barriers to sleep and that are applicable to the masses without obviously having the benefit of having a one-to-one with you or another sleep expert?
I think it's, in a word, it's education.
Yeah.
The right education. It's understanding what is the best return on investment. What are the factors that really determine sleep? I would say that they're physiological. I would say that sleep pressure, the ability for your body to be able to sort of across the day be awake, but slowly building up sleep pressure, understanding that for yourself, because that's a clue as to when your body is ready to fall asleep. That is one of the two major processes, biological processes, when it comes to sleep. The other one is the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm will also say, around about here, this is when you should be falling asleep, and this is when you should be waking up. For teenagers and people in their 20s, that drifts slowly to become later and later. That's the reason why they're not necessarily falling asleep before midnight. It's because of their technology use. They're on their phones because they're waiting to fall asleep. They're waiting for the biology to kick in. That's what we've learned. So I would say it's called the two-process model of sleep. It's really about sleep pressure and circadian rhythms. That's what we sort of look at first in terms of our assessment, and therefore those inform us of what the treatments should be. So if their circadian rhythm is out of whack, we use light or melatonin to change the timing of that. If it's a case that they've got sort of more of an insomnia issue, there's a treatment called sleep restriction therapy that doesn't actually restrict sleep. It just restricts your time in bed. And by doing that, it's a very powerful way for people to sort of learn, where are my ideal sleep times through the processes.
So you're saying that this, if I understand that correctly, you're saying certain people will benefit from going to bed later and getting up earlier or later, and other people, and it's trying to find your personal sweet spot for sleep, rather than necessarily having I guess it goes back to, I'm more familiar with exercise than I am with sleep as an ideology or an idea, is that doing a bench press might work better for one person, whereas dumbbells might work better for another, or more reps or less reps. So you're saying the same really applies to sleep, that some people can go to bed at midnight and get up at 8 and be as fresh as a daisy, and other people might need to go to bed at 10 to get up at 8 and still be fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a case of really sort of identifying from, I think what I do when I'm teaching people to actually do what I do, it's really a case of going, like, the first thing you should be looking at is, where is this circadian rhythm at? Is it normally timed, or is it out of whack? And usually the rule of thumb is that if they're a teenager, especially like in the second half of their teenage years, or if they're in their 20s, possibly 30s, they're more likely to have a delayed circadian rhythm, meaning they fall asleep later. And the clue is if they're able to sleep in on the weekends and, they're sort of catching up. And then the reverse is, if they're an older adult, then is it a case that their circadian rhythm is mistimed because they're struggling to stay awake after dinner, and they can fall asleep for 5 minutes, but then they're waking up at 4 a.m. on a consistent basis, regardless of what they do. So if that's the case, work on the circadian rhythm first. If it's not the case, then what else is going on here? And usually, insomnia is one of the biggest issues. It's difficulty falling asleep, it's difficulty maintaining sleep, waking up too long during the night. And the approach really is something called cognitive behavior therapy. But really, when we do it in practice, it's behavior cognitive therapy. We usually do the behavioral treatments first, which is changing your behaviors when you go to bed, doing this idea of something like sleep restriction therapy to sort of experiment with over a few nights. If I sort of go to bed a bit later and maintain those bedtimes, am I sleeping better? In other words, I'm not awake for as long. If there's been a mild improvement, delay it a little bit, try that for a few nights. Is that improvement? And you sort of keep doing that until you sort of find your sweet spot.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned melatonin there. It's not legal in this country to get over the counter. And I've tried it, and personally, I've taken, I think, 15 milligrams. When I've been in the States, I've not found it helped me at all for whatever reason. Have you come across any other kind of supplementary aids that have had a beneficial effect on helping people get to sleep or to recover during sleep?
Well, I guess first, melatonin has multiple applications, and therefore it makes it confusing. People don't understand it, including probably the UK government. So it's really only gets its best sleepy effect for kids up to, say, 10 years of age. After that, it gets a bit hard to sort of get that sleepy effect from it as a teenager or an adult. But if you have a circadian rhythm mistiming, like, say, for example, teenagers, then it acts as changing. It's called a chronobiotic. So it's trying to change the timing of your circadian rhythm. So in this case, for someone who's like a teenager or a young adult, you take it in the evening. The idea is you sort of try to find that sweet spot of when to take it, and then you need to take it earlier. So you're dragging it earlier. It's not a case of having it at the same time every night. And it's the opposite if you're an older adult who's waking up at 4 a.m. and every single morning and you can't get back to sleep. You take it at 4 a.m. and then each morning you take it gradually later and later to try to drag it later. So that's it's more so about the timing when it comes to adults. And I've got far more to say about it in terms of, like, melatonin has been used like at 20 milligram levels for premature infants with sepsis to save their lives. It's used to supplement chemotherapy and radiotherapy for people going through a whole range of different cancers. It's amazing. And it's really unfortunate that a lot of people are viewing it as something, or almost like demonizing it, which is really frustrating. They're sort of not really getting the sort of true science that's sort of just buried there.
The reason why I bought it was when I was for jet lag. Is that? I mean, I guess that's the most common reason why people are buying it. How would you use it in that instance, or does it not work? Maybe that's why I was going wrong. I was trying to use it for a problem it can't solve.
Yeah, and I think it's used for circadian rhythm issues, whether it's like you're in the same time zone and you've got like delayed circadian disorder or advanced, or it's a case if you've got shift work or you're doing jet lag. Definitely, it's for that. It's a question of knowing exactly how to use it and being educated about it.
Okay.
I mean, in general, like when I go from here to Europe, by the time I get to Europe, I'm falling asleep early and I'm waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning if I don't do anything. So I'm an older adult when I go over there. So the idea is I take it in the morning when I wake up, and I take it gradually later and later to drag it later. So I wake up later, but therefore I'm staying up later. When I come back from Europe to Australia, I'm up until 2 a.m. and I'm a teenager. So then I have to switch it over and take it in the evening, and then night after night, I have to start taking it earlier and drag it earlier. So that's the general way.
Interesting. So most of us are all doing it wrong and just popping it before we go to bed, which is not really the ideal way. And is there anything else that you found beneficial at all in helping with the circadian rhythms, or just general assisting with sleep?
Well, certainly with circadian rhythms, more so than melatonin, I definitely use light therapy. We've done clinical trials doing light therapy with teenagers, and it's been this one thing that they can do that probably takes, roughly 3 weeks to do. And not only does it improve their circadian rhythm timing and their sleep and their insomnia symptoms, also their cognitive performance and their depression symptoms. It's just this one thing that does all of these great things. In terms of also changing the circadian rhythm, we did one study where we didn't manipulate light, we didn't give any supplements or melatonin, but we only used scheduled exercise instead of doing that. And this was really for people that were sedentary, but we did find that it was really important to do something. Like if you are basically not moving and you're in dim light, your circadian rhythm can get worse in its time. We actually found when we gave one group basically to be sedentary in very dim light across a week, that their rhythm got later, it got worse. But the ones that were given exercise, so they were on a treadmill for 45 minutes. We had a sports scientist with us, so I'm not going to say that I exactly remember or know how high their heart rate was above their usual resting heart rate. But the point was it was 45 minutes timed in the morning, and it did manage to actually advance their rhythm a bit. So exercise has a bit of input as well. I haven't necessarily seen necessarily convincing evidence of food or food restriction in terms of its power compared to, say, exercise, melatonin, and light. But in terms of supplements, another one that comes up a lot is magnesium. And I think that's really misunderstood, again, thanks to Huberman. I think with his following, he pretty much convinced, I think, a lot of 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds potentially that magnesium was the way to go. But the evidence really shows that we lose our magnesium absorption from our diet when we're in our older ages. And really, if that lack of magnesium absorption is related to not sleeping well, which is usually sort of like waking a lot during the night, that's when you would do something like a magnesium supplement. But unfortunately now that boat has sailed. He's pretty much like, you know, to call a spade in 2022, when he didn't have Matt Walker on and he just went solo to sort of talk about sleep, he mentioned a particular type of magnesium called magnesium threonate, saying 145 milligrams was the way to go. When you go to his website, click on that, go to Momentous, get a 20% discount on magnesium threonate. Go on the Joe Rogan, mention the same thing about solid peer-reviewed evidence, and, you know, Joe Rogan looks it up and, you know, there's all these sales. And at the time, there was not a single study that showed that magnesium threonate in human beings was effective for sleep. And since then, there's been a couple of studies that come out and they're not convincing.
So what you would suggest then is actually, if you're going to take magnesium at all, the likelihood is it's more for our age group. It's going to be beneficial than for somebody who's young and already their bodies are more fine-tuned and working at a better rate than somebody perhaps in their 50s, whereby we need a little bit more help.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you know, there's going to be some people that will say magnesium helped me, but, you know, you can find a whole bunch of people that say it didn't as well. But you know, we're talking about magnesium from your diet. So if you're a young person and you found magnesium worked for you, but have a look at your diet. Are you eating a crappy diet? Like what sort of foods are you eating that contain magnesium or not? And there's a whole range of different ways. And to Huberman's credit, at least before he sort of talked about his supplement stack, he was talking about different behavioral strategies. So at least he did that, even though that's not his area of expertise. But you really should try to focus on the behavioral issues first. But, you know, there are some instances, like, say, for example, older adults, that's when they should essentially get into some particular supplements.
Interesting. So where do you see your research going over the next 5 years? What do you think is going to happen? What's the future for sleep, I guess? Do you think there's going to be more, you know, like you mentioned about light therapy and so on? Do you think there's going to be more things that are going to be not discovered, but understood better to help promote a better quality of sleep? Do you think that as a, you know, internationally, are we going to embrace sleep more, as opposed to, like some of the culture at the moment is sleep less, work harder? Do you think there's going to be like a rebound effect where people are going to actually go, fuck that, I need 8 hours sleep, otherwise I'm going not to be at my optimum, and that I'm going to burn out and so on, which is kind of what you said earlier?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two components to what you said there. And in terms of sleep research, I think the phases that I've seen, it's incredibly promising. And some of the really enlightening studies probably have come from what was a bit of a phase and is still happening, which is called big data. Like, say, for example, the UK Biobank, that's delivered so much rich information that's helped us learn about not just sleep, but circadian rhythms and light and so forth. So I think the fact that the number of sleep researchers has expanded incredibly across the world has been fantastic. It means we're covering more topics. My concern is if the wonderful, great young researchers coming through don't have a job to actually continue doing that. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, and I'd love the same for them to be able to do that. But in terms of where the world is heading, I think we've got that sort of organic growth already now from sleep. I don't see that changing. But what I wonder is, and I think we've alluded to it now and again in this podcast, is, are people going to get to that point where they go, who the fuck do I trust when it comes to sleep? Like, I'm so confused now. Someone's saying this, someone else is saying that. And that's, I think, where I've been saying, like, even, at my talk that when we met at that JETS conference a couple of years ago, I'm mentioning Google Scholar. People are so familiar with using Google. If you want to use a search engine to try to look at research, it makes sense to use Google Scholar. So just go to Google, type in Scholar. Suddenly, Google turns into Google Scholar, to enter the words that you're interested in reading about, but then add the word review, because those particular papers are much easier to read than all of the technical jargon. And I think people can start to verify it for themselves, that if it's a skill like shooting hoops in some ways, you've got to basically continue doing it, and you've got to practice it. And I think, say, for example, the recent thing that we've seen, I guess, like with Google Gemini, it's great to ask a question. That's the first point, but really tap into what's called the primary source of information, which is using Google Scholar, seeing if you can start to read the stuff to verify it for yourself.
Yeah, don't take everything at face value. I think that's the thing that I've discovered, is that there's marketing science and there's real science. If that makes sense. That's the thing. But listen, it's been great talking to you. It'd be good to see, catch up again and find out, how things have progressed, and any other knowledge bombs you can drop on us, and what research we should be watching out for. If somebody wants to kind of find out more about your work, where's the best place for them to go and get some peer-reviewed research other than Google Scholar?
The platform that I really focus on is LinkedIn. I've been on there for several years, and I really treat it as a place not only for me, hopefully teaching, because I do have that background in teaching, and trying to communicate in as best language as I can, the sleep science. But even for me, it's a place of learning. Like, I'm still learning so much about sleep and all of the different connections it has to different things. Like, I've just talked about melatonin, the fact it can be used for cancer. I think that's incredible. I never knew that 10 years ago. So I would say that maybe if you want to follow someone, I don't encourage people to follow someone. I think, do your own research, as much as that phrase has been bastardized. But yeah, if you want to sort of keep in touch with some of the stuff I'm saying, LinkedIn is really the place.
Fantastic. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to let you get your sleep now, because I know you're down under in Oz, and we've kept you up. So thanks a million, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a real pleasure. Great to catch up with you again.
Cheers.